Hello and welcome back to the RPA Developer Production Ready Essentials training. Today we're going to see and explain an example of string manipulation, which is frequently encountered in a great variety of business scenarios. Let's consider the example of a process that comprises two steps: extracting an address from an application and entering it in a different one. For the sake of simplicity, let's call them Application A and Application B. Even if the address format is city name, street name, and street number in both of them, Application A provides all of the pieces of information in a single field, but Application B can only store them in 3 different fields. The solution is to employ string manipulation methods to isolate the needed items, namely the city name, the street name, and street number, and then input the result in Application B. Are you ready to find out how that can be achieved using UiPath Studio? Let's begin. We'll build a sequence called bookstores. The project that we're about to create extracts some information from an input text and outputs it in a different format. The input string is generated by an application that searches for a specific writer and finds the bookstores where his books are available. The initial format is: you searched for author X. His books can be found at the following stores: Bookstore 1, Bookstore 2, Bookstore 3. After the execution of the workflow, the format will be availability for X, Bookstore 1, Bookstore 2, Bookstore 3. Let's start with an annotation to explain the purpose of this automation instance. And we're ready to create our first variable to store the initial message. We can add a default value or use an assign activity to determine the content of the variable. Let's go with the second option. We'll rename this to assign initial message. We'll add the message variable in the to field. Next, we can simply copy and paste our sentence in the to field and make sure that it's placed between quotation marks. To start processing the string and extract the author and the bookstores, we'll create 2 variables: a string called author and a list of strings named bookstores. Let's extract the author using an assign activity. This is the expression that we need to type. Firstly, message.split divides the message into 2 different sentences using the period character as a delimiter. Now, there are 2 period characters in our input text, so it was split into 2 array elements. The author name can be found in the first element, which is why we continued the expression this way. Now, since the sentence is of the array item type, we need to convert it to a string that can be split further, hence the usage of the .toString method. So far, we've isolated the piece of text that we're interested in. Next, we'll use the substring method on the message variable, which has already been split once, so it only contains a sentence. The name of the writer is mentioned after the author term, and the last index of method places the index right after the mentioned string. At the end, all that's left is the name of the author. Let's move on to the list of strings. Firstly, let's create a variable called bookstores and set its type to list of strings. Moving on, we'll add one more assign activity to the designer panel to write an expression that extracts the bookstore list, and we'll call it getBookstoreList. Let's write down the expression, and we'll explain every part of it afterwards. Okay, let's begin. The split method turned our message string into 2 distinct array items. Nothing new here. Next, 1 is the index of the sentence that we want to extract. Remember that array items are 0 indexed. The sentence is then turned into a string and split once again after the colon. The resulting string is the bookstore list, or the last element. The list was split once again after the colon, and the result, namely the bookstores, are stored in a list variable. And the final step is to print the message to the output panel, and we'll create one more variable to store our processed message. Let's open the expression editor and fill in the field. Firstly, the string.format enables us to display the content of a variable as a string, regardless of its type. The next part is the text that we want to print to the output panel, followed by the arguments to be printed. The VBCR constant moves to the next line in order for each bookstore to be printed on a separate line. Let's run it to see how it goes. OK, here is the message in the new format. And that was all for today. Thank you for watching.